This week in my Adventures in Storyline, I wanted to learn about 3 different things. One of those is timelines, and then I also wanted to know about triggers and variables, and finally about layers. And so how can I do that? I thought I would just show you through the use of 2 or 3 different slides that I created that illustrate that and how I learned. To play with the timeline, one of the things that I tried to do is I brought up a slide and I decided that during this slide, I wanted this picture inside of this triangle to change or to evolve or to go from one to the next. So I just laid a number of pictures on top of it, created all these triangle pictures, and just there's image 1, image 2, image 3, and you can see down here, if I pull up my timeline, you'll see that I have various different images here. Okay, and then what I did is I laid them out here on here, and you're able to take this timeline and you can adjust where those things come in at the timeline. So I thought, well, what the heck, I'll have one picture down there first, and then I want it to evolve at about 3 seconds. I will have this picture come in right on top of it. And then I'll have the original picture come back in at 6 seconds, and finally have this picture come back in. So it's going picture A, picture B, picture A, picture B, that kind of thing, that it would evolve over the top. And that's how I set this timeline up to do it that way. Let's take a look and see how that then shows up by just previewing this. There it comes, and there's a picture in there. And now watch how after a few seconds it switches to this, and then back again to this one, and then finally it comes to that, to rest on that picture. So we have this evolution, and it's all done with a timeline, and all you had to do was adjust the timeline back and forth and get that done. In this slide, I needed to use triggers and layers and also variables to make sure that it happened. I'm in the preview side so that you can see what's happening. Okay, so it just explains up here what's going on. But I have this dial, it's a preset dial, which has certain variables that says, okay, what's going on? What I did is I built a bunch of different layers to show that when I changed this dial to a different setting, a different picture would come up here to help explain what was going on with that setting. So, for example, on a shutter speed with a camera, if you set it at 1/250th, what is the kind of things that you should be taking pictures of? And you can take that and you can set it up there. And this slow-moving people and children work really well at this setting. All right. Whereas at a 1/60th, you might want to change that over there, and you can learn that slow handheld setting for sharp images. Okay, that's the information, and it's just changed by where this position is on the dial. So how do you get that to do that, to show when it sets at this one that this picture comes up versus this one that this picture comes up? And that's what I wanted to do within this learning how to use variables and triggers and various layers that are going along with that. So how did I get the dial to work? It's actually pretty simple. What I did is I went in and I created a slide, and this slide then, what I needed to do is I needed to add this dial. To add the dial, I went up to Insert and over here to Dial, which is a preset area, and click that. Once you click that and it comes up, then you can get into the formatting of it and set up how it's to look, how the pointer is to look, etc. And I so did that. Then over here on the Designs area, that's where we get into what is known as variables. Where are the settings along here? And I said, well, I need these 7 settings. So I set the start value at 1 and the end value at 7. So this goes 1 through 7 along here. And then I relabeled these to the settings that go along with the story that I'm trying to tell, which is the shutter speeds that are on the camera. And so I do it. And so you have this variable, and it's set up the various different ways, but when the dial is dragged over it, and you can set it up to different things. So when it goes from one of these to the next, it goes one value at a time, and it goes from 1 to 7. And that's what it is. So those variables are already now built into it. So that's the first thing that you do, is you set up that. The second area is over here under Slide Layers. What happens when the dial goes to the different levels? And what I wanted it to happen is that over in this area of the slide, a new picture would appear that would help to relate to the type of picture you could take at that setting. So I set up 7 different layers with different pictures in each layer. So I made one that looks like, for example, this. At the 1/500th, this is the picture that I wanted to show up. And that was one layer. A separate layer, and all you do to create a separate one is you just click on that, a new layer, and then it comes up. And so at the 1/1000th layer, I wanted this to come up, very fast movement, so that you could kind of get an idea. And that I did that over in this area where it says Slide Layers. I just kept coming up with different ones for each of the different areas. And then from that, I have these layers ready and I have the dial ready. Now I need to tie the two together, and that comes with triggers. And to do that, you go down to your base layer there, which is this thing here, and then you go up here to triggers, and it shows right here. Okay, so now we have this show, and it basically says show layer. Which layer do you want to show? Well, I want to show the very fast, this one right here. I want to show that layer when the dial turns, and here's its value. What's its value? And you click on that, and it'll drop down here, and it'll say when the value is equal to, or whichever one you need that to be, when it's equal to the value of, and on the very fast one, that has to be the value of 7, which is over here. So I hooked it there. And then I created a separate for each layer, show the layer for this one, when the value is 4 or whatever the value is. And I set a one up for each of the different layers so that it shows up at the right time when it's all connected together. So basically the trigger is saying when this thing shows here, then I show this layer. When it's up here, it shows a different layer, and that's how this whole thing works. And you saw that at the beginning where we demonstrated how it worked. Now, taking what I learned from the dial and the use of layers and triggers and variables, I looked at the slide, and on this one I can demonstrate I did the exact same thing, just with different pictures and using this slide. I set this up as having various variables. And so as you can see here, when I'm trying to teach them about aperture openings, I can slide it along and say at an f16, this is what it kind of looks like. Whereas at a f5.6, it's much lighter, but there's more shallower depth of field, so things in the background start to be blurred, etc., and that kind of thing. And a student can sit here and play with this all the way along, seeing the relationship between brighter and depth of field, and moving it to various levels so that they can start to compare to see how things look along those lines. It's using the same thing, and that would be the triggers, the variables, and the layers. So timelines, triggers, layers, variables. Sounds kind of complicated, but at the same time, when you start to look at it, Storyline has laid this out fairly simply, and they've given you some really good things to work with, such as the sliders and the preset dials and other things that might be able to be helpful. You can also kind of start looking ahead and start to think about the exams that can happen, the quizzes and other things and how these could play into those. So lots of good things ahead, various different ways that all of these concepts can be generalized and used in various different ways. So let's have a great weekend, and best of luck with all the work that you're doing on this.